that church had about 1,200 folk in it when I left to go to my next call. And it was a church that I was their first intern, first pastor after they had a bunch of interns. So they were ripe for growth. I was in the right place at the right time to be part of an exciting ministry. That church's average worship attendance went from about 295, 300 to close to 600 per week in the 6.5 years that I was there. It didn't happen because of me. It happened because of the dynamic way in which ministry was happening. In fact, if we hadn't grown, going from an internship program to 2 full-time pastors, something would have been wrong. But what was neat for me was I got to experience some exponential growth at the very beginning of my ministry, a lot of which happened in spite of me. But I got to at least be a part of that experience. Second call was as more of a co-pastor at a 1,700-member congregation, big corporate church. So I've been a part of that, had some experience with huge staff and doing all the corporate stuff. Third call was here. 30 people. When I got to that church first day, and that's all that was there. That's it. Those 2 little buildings connected together with a little narthex, a gathering area in between them. 6+ acres of property. Incredible location as far as what could be and what they could grow into. Carol and I, when we were considering this call, Bishop Trexler at the time wanted me to come down and do this. So I met with him and he told me, he said, "Have you ever been to Newport Richey?" And I said, "No." And to be honest, I didn't really think where Newport Richey was because I grew up here. I was on the east coast of Florida. I didn't know much about the Tampa area. Just north of Tampa. So Carol and I, we flew down from North Carolina, where we were at the time, and got in a car, drove, followed the directions. We turned on to Old County Road 54, which goes this way in front of the church, and we drove right past it, didn't see it. They had a sign up there, but you couldn't see the sign for a while. It was called Christus Victor. It was not white, it was a pumpkin color. It had mold all over it. It had a dark, dingy roof. All the trees that you see were overgrown and hanging down. They did a lousy job of taking care of the property because they basically had grown about 30 people, and most of them were elderly, and they had very little money. The roof that you see there looks like it needs a little bit of cleaning because the new roof we put on after I got there. The old roof was dark, dingy, and leaked. And just so you know, this new roof is still leaked. In fact, it was right near the altar area. And every once in a while we had a hard rain, I'd be inside, you hear something, and then you feel it. So we're not the only church with a roof leak. When I met with the folks there about their ministry and about possibly coming, it was supposedly understood that they were what was called a restart. They call them redevelopments now. And what they had to agree to do was stop doing church the way they'd been doing it. Their church council ceased to be a church council, and they were more of an advisory board working with a mission developer that would come in and basically have a little more influence and say and kind of help redirect and guide. What I did when I got there, though, was I continued to use the church council kind of as a church council. And we kept calling them church council. But I started with them, we started with this type of a Bible study, and it grew into a whole new vision statement about how to do church. But they had 30 people in worship on a good Sunday. They were Christus Victor. It's Latin. People in the community didn't even know what it meant. It's in Old English font because that's the font they used on their worship bulletins. It was cold. The people were great. Warm, friendly Christian people. I still love them all to death. And a lot of them are still there. The ones that hadn't died off, none of them moved away. Well, a couple moved away, but they had because they hadn't, not because of what we were doing. But it was a cold field. And after I got there, I was having breakfast at a little place across the street, and they said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm the new pastor developer over at Christus Victor." They went, "What do you know about Christus Victor?" "Oh, that's that church with all the problems." And your parking lot floods all the time. Every time it rains, and it did, and it still does, sort of. I have pictures of me in knee-deep water when hurricanes were coming through. That's another story I'll tell you sometime about all the details. But I was standing in knee-deep water trying to do sandbags with a couple of older gentlemen to try to save the building. And I'm wondering, where do all the moccasins that are in the river go when there's flooding? What am I doing? Lousy facilities, very small. We could seat maybe, the worship room was about half the size of this fellowship hall, if that, maybe smaller. Fit about 150 people for worship at most, squeezing them in. We go over, well over 200, 220 when we opened up the glass doors they had into the narthex and had seating there. But then the fire marshal would come, we would have been in big trouble. And a group of folks who had been doing church the same way for so long, they couldn't really see beyond what could be. My very first Sunday, it was August the 15th, 1999. It was St. Mary Magdalene Day, I believe. So instead of preaching for the first Sunday on a real great text for mission and redevelopment, they wanted me to preach on the text for the day, which because it was a festival day, I had to write a sermon on the Magnificat, which is beautiful. Well, one of the very yeah, it's very the same. So I'm nervous as can be. I've got my robe on, the stole, and I'm standing in the back of the church, ready to go in for the announcements and start my first worship. It's 10 a.m. one service. And at 10 a.m., the organist, who was this little lady about this tall, had a big bun, hairdo, and she reminded of almost like if you think of church lady. This was church lady, and she was so sweet. It's Loretta, or it was just sweet as could be. And she's sitting at the organ, and she's it wasn't a pipe organ, it was a fairly big console, and you could barely see her open it. And she starts doing the chimes. The tradition at Christus Victor was at 10 a.m., because they only had one service 10 a.m. At 10 a.m., 10 chimes. And that marked time for, in fact, y'all might want me to do it now, just say, when's he going to get started here? So, I'm getting ready, I'm nervous as can be. It's my first time, how am I going to get this small group of people we wrote this thing? So I'm standing there ready to go in, 10 o'clock, and the chimes start, and I take a step after the first chime to walk into the worship room. Jackie Letchick, smaller than Loretta, about this tall, 90 pounds soaking wet, but a big NASCAR fan. Just didn't make sense to me. She reaches out with the strength of Samson with one arm, and she stops me in my tracks. Jackie, what's wrong? You have to wait until after the third chime.
Oh, wow.
Why? I don't know. We've always done it this way. Okay. They were entrenched in crazy tradition. Always done it this way. And oh, heaven forbid. The next week, I walked in on the first chime. The next week, there were no chimes. And then we would add chimes during special times for the course of the worship. Instead of this announcement that it's 10 o'clock. Then eventually it was good because we didn't do 10 o'clock worship. We had to go to 2, 3, 4 services.